Hello, everyone. I am so excited to introduce to you the very lovely and talented Rebecca Devaney today, who is a textile artist, a researcher, and a teacher. And I'm super excited to bring her into this conversation and really talk more about her work and a lovely tour that we have planned with her in spring this year. So without further ado, let me bring Rebecca on.
Hi, Ekta. How are you? It's lovely to be here.
Hi, Rebecca. It's fantastic to have you here and to have the opportunity to really get to know your background a little bit more and hear all about your creative journey. I'm so excited to hear also about what you have planned for us in Paris this April. So I would love to kind of begin with a question that I like to ask all my guests, which is this, that if you can think back to your childhood and try and remember your first textile memory, what would that be? Usually, people have the most beautiful, most intimate stories, and I can't wait to hear yours.
Okay, with pleasure. I think it was in older or later years that I realized when I was thinking back to my grandparents or my childhood, whilst I didn't necessarily recommend or remember events, I remembered the textiles. I can clearly see my grandmother's 1960s, 1970s curtains. I can see the texture of her carpet. I was obviously crawling at the time. I can see in my other granny's house, the throws and the cushions on her couch. And in my parents' house, I can see they had a beautiful couch with all these big floral designs, and then floral wallpaper. So I think that's it. It's like as if my childhood memories were based around textiles, and that's how I created those stories. And it was only later, or those memories, and it's only in later life that I realized what I was doing, that I was destined to be working in textiles.
That's so beautiful. I could, see in my mind's eye that couch
Yeah.
and similarly me as well. I also think of my childhood, especially early childhood, in terms of colors and textures and patterns. I can distinctly remember the quilts my grandma used to make, or the embroideries that my mum used to do. She would often sit after the day's work and embroider, cross stitch. So I know exactly what you mean. And it's just, I feel those memories are so precious.
Yeah.
Um, what will, the next generation remember that our parents were watching Netflix?
I know, I
I
know.
often, I often joke with my friends. It's like, at least with us, they will still have a lot of textiles around them.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly.
so that's beautiful. So I'm really curious to hear what happened next. And so walk me through your um, background. Where did you grow up? What did you study? And how did you come to be living in Paris
Hmm.
and embroidering haute couture garments? I mean, those beautiful, beautiful one-off garments. So tell us more about that journey.
I'm very excited to share that story with you today, but I tend to do better with images. So I've prepared a little presentation to share with you, and it illustrates my journey and how I got here. So I'd love to share that with you today. If that
That would be fantastic. I was
okay.
really hoping you would show
Yeah,
us something visual. We are all visual people.
exactly.
All right, take us into your slides.
Okay, perfect. So, whilst my talents lie in textiles, they do not lie in technology. So, you may need to bear with me here a moment whilst I share my screen here. Oh, it's just paused. So, this usually takes me a minute or two.
Don't worry, take all the time you need.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Can you see this slide, Ekta?
I can.
Okay, perfect.
Looking good. Looking good.
Great. Okay, so I always start this saying les pétiments à Paris, and I'll explain this term to you in a little minute. But this is the tale or the story of how I arrived, the long journey and the winding road I took. But I'll begin by saying that I have a bachelor's in art, craft, and design education. So I trained initially as an art teacher from the National College of Art and Design in Ireland. So I grew up in Dublin, hence the accent. And I worked as an art teacher for 8 years in secondary schools and in university. And I absolutely loved it. But I returned to university to do an MFA in textile art and artifact. And then my most recent qualification is as a professional haute couture embroiderer. And I studied that at Ecole Lesage in Paris. So I took quite a winding road. And one of the first steps was that my degree was a joint degree. So, as well as training as an art teacher, I also trained as a textile artist. And this was my degree show, this series of little dolls. And it's called A Response to the Shadow Doll by Evan Boland. So, my whole family are actually very literary, and we were always surrounded by books. And all of my family work in publishing and the book business, so I'm the black sheep. But with that grounding of storytelling and poetry, I always tried to, well, I just always was inspired by poetry and the words and what they evoke. And without much formal training in embroidery, because I was studying textile art from a fine art practice, I began to explore as much as I could hand embroidery, machine embroidery, fabric manipulation, and I just absolutely loved it. And these are some of the ladies that have inspired me, writers like Kate Chopin, Sylvia Plath, Charlotte Bronte, and Jane Austen. And what I was most interested in was how they depicted um, social constructs of femininity and beauty. And well, Sylvia, well, in all of their stories, what happened to women who didn't fit those constructs of beauty and the repercussions for them. So I grew up on a diet of these fantastic authors. And in Ireland, then we have this, great tradition of poets. And one of my favorites when I was young was W.B. Yeats, who's there on the right. And on the left is Maud Gonne, who was an activist and an actress. And she was also hailed as the most beautiful woman in Ireland. And she was the subject of countless poems by W.B. Yeats and plays and all sorts of things. But she was it was unrequited love. Maud Gonne didn't return his passions. But he I'll be talking about his poem, about one of my favorite poems in a minute. But whilst I was doing both the degree and the master's, I had the opportunity to study dress history. And I was a very romantic teenager. So I had these lovely ideas of women dressing in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century and all of this extravagance at Versailles in France. And I just thought it was the place to be. And I dreamed of, living in the 18th century. And I loved, all of the embellishments and the lace and the silk and the flowers, the tiny little slippers, the headdresses, even the crinolines and the bustles, and this idea of sculpting a silhouette to achieve this ideal of beauty. So like studying art and fashion history, it was a lovely combination. It was a beautiful marriage, and I was very lucky to have had that opportunity. And during those studies, I discovered the Théâtre de la Mode, which was an exhibition after World War II. And it's when all of the haute couture houses around, this is important, this will come up later, around Opéra and Place Vendôme in Paris, all of those luxury houses came together and they decided to make this exhibition on miniature dolls called Pandora dolls. And I'll just show you some beautiful images here. So it was a fantastic collaboration of artists and set designers and fashion designers. And they created over 100 little sets or dioramas. And each, you can see over here, they're creating the little Pandora dolls and sculpting their figures and so on. And then each of the fashion houses created these miniature dresses. The feather workers. So in France, you have a craft called feather working. So the feather workers made these miniature, feathered plumes for their hats, which had been made by hat makers. The modiste is a milliner in French. The shoemakers, the jewelry makers, everything was made in miniature. And just to fit into a social construct of femininity, I love miniature dolls. So this for me was just filled me with kind of joy and imagination. And so when I was doing my master's, I continued this motif of the miniature Pandora dolls. Um, and when I'd returned to do my master's, it was all based on A Wishes for the Clots of Heaven, which is a beautiful poem by W.B. Yeats, um, which most of you probably know. It's had I the heavens embroidered cloths inwrought with gold, and it goes on
It's
and on.
one of my favorites, absolute favorites. And every time I read those lines, it's just I get goosebumps.
Yeah.
It's so, so beautiful.
It's
Yeah.
such a beautiful poem and it's so visual as well.
Yes.
It's just easily translated into embroidery. Um, so I was enjoying this kind of moment of creativity. And what I was trying to do, this one is called The Trope of Goddess. And this is how Yeats very much put Maud Gonne up on a pedestal and as the most beautiful woman in Ireland. And these are just little detailed images of the techniques that I was using. So remembering that I was in art college, so there was a lot of using the glue gun, as opposed to uh, using actual haute couture techniques. And, it was at that point that I said, that's it. This has been a dream for a really long time. I want to go to France and I want to train in haute couture embroidery techniques at Ecole Lesage. So, Ecole being the French word for school, and Lesage is Maison Lesage, the House of Lesage, which is the kind of one of the very best, if not the best, embroidery house in Paris. And I was all set to leave for Paris, but I took a very winding route and received the Thomas de Man Junior Memorial Trust Award to go to Mexico and research hand embroidery techniques across the country. So it was a very, very special time where I met almost 20 craftspeople, most of whom were women, and they were extremely generous with their time, and they explained to me what embroidery meant to them personally, to their communities and to their cultures. And when I was then finished with the research, the next step was to exhibit it. And what was very important for me, you can see in the bottom right hand image there, was that there was, you saw the textile, and then right beside that, you saw the image of the person who created it. And then you got to read their story and see where they were from. So that we created, rather than the textiles being an object for admiration, that the viewers would understand that whenever we do embroidery or anything with our hands, we it's imbued with parts of us, the time, the memories, the emotions, and that's communicated through the colors, the stitches, the motifs, and so on. So I love that, how when you just unravel the textile, you start to find out this person's, really personal narrative through embroidery. So with that, I then finally made it to
Mhm.
Paris. And I had signed up to go to Ecole Lesage. And you can see here the image on the left. This is an embroiderer studio in 1910. And this is what I thought it was going to be like. Again, living in the past. So you can see these ladies are working on their timbre frames. In French, that's a métier à broder, so an embroidery frame. And this technique, you can see the image on the right-hand side, timbre embroidery it doesn't use a needle, it uses like, it's almost like a
I
crochet
hope.
hook. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And you have this handle. So the ladies there, you can see one hand is on top of the embroidery and then the other hand is underneath, guiding the beads or the sequins or the thread. And it's a completely new gesture to learn. Very tricky, lots of homework. But the first part, as with most things, was to do a sampler. So I had signed up. It was going to take me 6 months to get my qualification, and I was in class on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 9:30 to 12:30. And then when I was doing this sampler, you're learning how to embroider with beads, sequins, how to embroider through leather, which is very painful, how to embroider with raffia, chenille, golden foil, ribbon, all the different kind of materials and techniques you might be asked to work with in a studio. And I was doing about 6 hours of homework a night, and I kind of thought, yeah, I can do this. I'm a former teacher. I can practice what I preach. And then we started on the final piece. So everybody does the same final piece. It's the same design, same materials. And on the subject of materials, in the image on the left, you can see just beside the embroidery frame, there's a little bag. And I received that on my first day and opened it up, and it was like Christmas morning. It was filled with threads and sequins and beads in little kind of envelopes and packages. So, um, in each section of the embroidery, then you're learning a new technique and you're learning how to use the different materials. So at this phase, the homework had gone from 6 hours a night to between 14 to 16 hours. I was coming home from school, having lunch, and working until 1 o'clock in the morning. And so you can see see, I always say when I was doing this piece, it felt enormous. And now when I look at it, it's actually tiny. But it took up so much emotional space in my life. And these sequins here on the left are 3 millimeter sequins. So they're tiny. And you're adding on thousands and thousands of them. Um, the image here on the right hand side, this is the border. And the pink beads are applied using a vermicelli technique, where you have to be random in how you apply the beads. And just to give you a sense, that border is 2 meters around, and to do 1 centimeter squared of the vermicelli technique took me an hour. So you,
Wow. Yeah, I can appreciate that and how it must have taken over your life.
oh, God, I had no life.
Of course, if you're doing this 14 hours a day,
Yeah, yeah,
I remember, when I learned embroidery, and we had someone come in from Bhuj, Kutch, who, as you probably already know, that in India also the tambour embroidery, which is called Ari embroidery,
yes,
is a tradition that dates back hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was again that gesture, you sit down on the floor and
yeah.
you're holding this needle and you kind of catch the thread from below. so so you have my utmost respect for having done this. Oh my God, I remember this is so tricky.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I was quite curious, just to kind of pause this for a second.
Mm.
Did you do any embroidery before, like when you were perhaps little, or in college when you were training to be a teacher? Was embroidery part of your growing up years in terms of actual practice, or you just grew up around it?
Um, So when I was growing up, there actually wasn't much embroidery in my house. My mother was a knitter. So going back to what we were saying earlier, when we would be sitting watching TV, my sister and I in the winter would usually be sitting watching TV like this, and our mum would be raveling her skeins of wool around our arms. We were handy that way. But it was the textiles and embroidery came in when I started in university, and when we were choosing our art practice, we tried out painting, ceramics, graphic design, and textiles. And I'd never done textiles before. So the teacher on the first day, or the tutor, said, Helen McAllister, and I can see the day clearly. She said, you're going to do sampling, and I said, I don't know what that is. And she said, you just play with the threads and the stitches, and I didn't even really know about stitches because I didn't do home economics, so I'd no formal training in embroidery or sewing. Um, so I think my first few stitches were, the running stitch or little cross stitch, but they were little X's, and it was doing paper collage and tearing edges and fraying edges. And I did the first one, and she said, okay, and now you just keep going and you just keep exploring whatever interests you. And that was it. I fell in love. I loved, like, just, I found frayed edges fascinating. And um, I applied then into the textile section, and I was accepted. And I guess that's why I wanted to go to Lesage, is because I felt that I had missed out on a formal training, that kind of imposter syndrome or feeling
Mm.
inadequate. And my tutor was saying, you don't need to go to Ecole Lesage, you can teach yourself. And I was saying, no, 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 I want to go to Paris. I want there to be candlelight and, poets living in a in an attic. I wanted to do the whole experience. And the idea was is that I would incorporate the techniques I learned at Ecole Lesage into my own artistic practice. So yeah, that's where it comes from, a feeling of inadequacy. But I certainly, by the end of the 6 months training, I was I was adept at all of the skills and techniques. Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. That image of mum unraveling the skins. Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, we could have been in two parts of the world doing the exact same thing.
Yes.
Because my mum would knit nearly every day, especially when watching TV.
Yeah.
Sometimes she would go to the cinema with like a little bit of the front, and then she would come back with the whole front. Of course, not the armhole bit, but it was like magic. What, you've gone with two knitting needles and you've come out with this. So I totally get that. And we used to be constantly making these
Yeah.
skeins into balls of yarn.
Yes.
Oh, what a treat. What a treat to go back to those moments with you, Rebecca. This is lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, let's carry on and
Okay.
look
Yeah.
at your beautiful, beautiful work.
Okay. So moving on then. Um, after the 6 months, I had eventually finished, and I um had completely fallen in love with the city, as I said, and I'd fallen in love with all of the materials and the beads and so on. And I decided that I would try my hand at working as a haute couture embroiderer. So I extended my stay, and I signed up. There are 3 recruitment agencies that specialize in haute couture embroiderers in Paris. So I signed up to all 3. And I'll tell you a little bit about that now in a minute. But I thought I'd include this just for, just as a real sharing part. I was a mature student, so I was in my early 30s. And my training at Lesage was in French, which was important later on when I started working as an embroiderer. But as a mature student, I found it very hard to remember anything. So after I'd finished my embroidery homework, I used to do out these little notebooks and sketchbooks, trying to remember the techniques and taking all of these notes and getting out the dictionary and doing all my French translation as well. So I suppose in a sense of trying to encourage other people, I started to do a blog called Les Petits Mains à Paris, and petit main means, it literally means little hand.
Little hand.
But petit main is what they call needle workers in Paris. So I just wanted to share my journey, and I would, week by week, I would do a little blog post of what I'd learned or not learned, or my joys and my despair. And I wanted to not necessarily encourage people to go to Ecole Lesage, but no matter what age you are, if you have a dream, you can make it happen. So that was I used to send them out to the Irish Embroiderers Guild every week, and they were my cheerleaders. They were my only contact with the outside world, really. And then, yes, so I embarked on my next adventure as an embroiderer. And over the next 2 years, then I worked for Louis Vuitton, Celine, Fendi, Yves Saint Laurent, Chanel, Dior, all the big names. And we were making costumes for the Met Gala Ball, the Cannes Film Festival, um, all these kind of fancy events, the Princess of Monaco, Lady Gaga, Catherine Deneuve, Beyonce. So it was a fantastic experience. It was really kind of a fairy tale moment. And I used to ring my granny in the morning, and I used to say, "Oh my gosh, today I'm going to Yves Saint Laurent." And she'd say, "Oh my gosh, get off the phone, don't be late." So I was just thrilled. And as a contract embroiderer, then you're sent off to all the different studios around Paris. So you get to see which studio you like working in, and which studio, they work in a way that doesn't suit you. And it's just a great it was a fantastic kind of paid internship. So I was very blessed to have done that. And in my spare time, of which there is a lot as an embroiderer because it's so seasonal, I started to delve into the history of haute couture. Not so much from the glamorous point of view at that stage, this is all very glamorous here, but actually about all the craftspeople who were behind the scenes. And would spend all of my free time in a library in Paris called the Bibliothèque Fornée, and it's dedicated to artists, craftspeople, and designers. So the painting on the left, I could find out about lace makers, I could find out about thread spinners, I could find out about gold work embroiderers as opposed to regular embroiderers. The painting on the right, I could find out about tissu indienne or chintz, and how French aristocrats went crazy for the printed cottons from India, and then how that led to toile de Jouy. Like it was just there were so many stories to be revealed, and I began to write more and more about the history and heritage that was behind the scenes, and kind of glimpsing inside the studios and wondering what it would be like for the women who worked in these crafts. Anyone who asked me to write about it, I'd write about it. So, in exhibition catalogs and books about fashion, and for magazines like Selvage and the Maker's Atelier and the Stitcher's Journal and Surface Design and so on. And I was developing all of this kind of vast amount of knowledge, and also lots of addresses for where to buy the best materials in Paris, because as lovely and talented as Parisian embroiderers are, they tend to be very secretive about where to go to get the best materials, and they wouldn't share their addresses with me. So there was a lot of pounding the pavement, which isn't a hard job in Paris because it's so beautiful. But I became determined to find out about the haberdasheries or the notion stores and how they were laid out across Paris. And that's where I had the idea of launching Textile Tours of Paris, where I would bring people on guided walking tours of the haberdasheries and the flea markets. So, yeah.
Oh, this is so exciting. Your beautiful journey into embroidery and into Paris. Oh my God, it just seems so dreamy. And kudos to you for following the dream, right? I mean, you just kept going. That's what I was just marveling at. It's like, that you did not get deterred from this, like wherever this took you, whether it was Mexico or it was, and it's so brave, right? To leave everything and everyone behind and just take a couple of suitcases, to pack your life in them, and then just move to a whole new place just to chase a dream. I just feel that is the ultimate courageous act. And having done it myself, I know a little bit of leaving home behind means and finding your feet in a new place. So I'm just so excited to hear, how this has unfolded for you in the most beautiful way possible. And I'm also so excited about us taking the textile tour with you in spring. Um, So I want to share with everyone who's listening that we will be doing this from the 19th of April. We'll be spending 3 days in Paris, soaking up all inspiration and hopefully buying the most beautiful, gorgeous materials, which we will be taken to Rebecca's little black book, all these secret addresses. And so, Rebecca, do you want to give us a little tiny sneak peek of what that's going to be all about?
Well, Ekta, I thought you might ask